At long last, Nikon is refreshing the Z50. They've announced the Z50II. I love the Z50. I've shot a ton with it. My family shot a ton with it. I think it's perfect for a wide range of photographers. We'll talk about why and what's exciting and maybe not so exciting in the new version. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson, and this week we're going to talk about kind of the other end of the spectrum from photography gear that we're often talking about, the big, crazy, expensive Leicas and Z9s and Z8s. We're going to talk about a camera that I have loved since it launched in 2019, the Z50, and its successor, which was just announced with a whole bunch of improvements that I've really wanted in a new APS-C smaller sensored camera, something light, something small, something I can hand to my kids, something I can loan to someone who's just getting excited about photography or buy as a present for somebody in my life on a little bit more of a budget who's interested in photography. It's a great little camera. The update is exciting. We're gonna talk about who I think these cameras are for, why they're so exciting. I'll go through some images from my long number of years with the Z50. And then we'll go over some of the specs in the new camera, talk about it. I'll be getting one as fast as I can into my hands. I'll have one of the very first ones out, and I'll do a full review when that happens, along with a setup guide for anybody excited about this camera. Before I launch into that, I want to make sure everybody knows on the 19th of this month, November 19th, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, we're having a big free group photography meetup, get together, powwow, and you can join up on that on Zoom or YouTube Live. You can sign up at hudsonhurney.com/office hours and leave us a question. We're going to have just a wide open Q&A. Any photographic topic is fair game, but we're going to talk a bit about why what's going on behind the camera is more important than what's in the camera, things that you can do to kind of develop your photographic craft, whatever gear you have. All right, so let's jump in and talk about, I think a lot of people, when this camera launched in 2019, the Z50, thought this is a tiny little toy. It feels so small. Fact of the matter is, I have had my now 8- and 7-year-old kids playing with this camera for years, bouncing around with it in Costa Rica and Mazatlan, photographing the eclipse with it, photographing wildlife with it. I've taken it on trips with my family to Baja, where it was the only camera that I took because it's so small and light, and it wasn't a photo-centric trip, and come back with amazing images. I've shot wildlife with it, I've shot sports with it, I've used it with big expensive primes like the 500 PF or the 2.8 70-200 S lens. It is an amazing little powerhouse of a small sensored camera, but what's truly great about it is partly its smaller size and lightweight, partly the fact that the lenses designed for it are smaller and lightweight, and the price. The fact that you can buy this camera with its kit pair of lenses, the 16 to 50, and because of the smaller sensor, that's the equivalent of a 24 to 75 variable aperture little lens, and as well as the 50 to 250 lens, this little extendable wonder, both of which have built-in image stabilization, so you get your vibration reduction from these lenses. You can get this whole kit. This 50 to 250 is the equivalent of a 75 to 375 millimeter lens in the full frame world. And you can buy the whole thing for, what is it, $1,300 essentially with the brand new Z52. The Z50 you can get even more shoestring. We'll go into details about what's different about the new camera from the old camera and let you think about those kinds of things. But I have long recommended this camera to people who are on a budget. You know, people would approach me and say, well, should I buy the Z5? And I say, if you're really worried about the price difference between the Z6 and the Z5, the glass to cover that full frame sensor is going to kill you with how much it costs to get anything close to what you can get for $1,300 with, it was even cheaper with the original Z50, with the 50 to 250 and the 16 to 50. Now another real benefit from this APS-C Nikon Z system is that there are some fabulous APS-C lenses aside from these kit lenses. I really like Nikon's 24mm 1.7, and the only reason I'm not holding it in my hand right now is it is on a Z30 that's just constantly set up to do these videos in my studio, and I'm recording with it. I record almost all of my YouTube videos on the 24 1.7. It's the perfect focal length here in the studio. It gives me a little separation between the background and foreground here at 1.7. There are a couple of non-Nikon DX lenses for the Nikon Z mount that I absolutely am blown away by, and I've done videos about it. I'll show you some photos from them. One of them is this Viltrox 75mm 1.2 built for the Nikon ZF system. It's, you know, a large, heavy piece of glass to put on this small camera, but the image quality out of it is stunning. It's very, very similar in many ways to the Planet. It may not have exactly the most amazing, perfect circular balls and absolute perfect, but it is stunning. It reminds me a lot of my 105 1.4 lens, but this lens is special. I'll show you some photos to show you why. I did a whole video about that. You can click right up here that was on aftermarket lenses for the Nikon Z system. Another one that I love is a manual focus 23mm 1.2 that Voigtlander does. That's just incredible. The minute that the Z50II launched, I actually ordered that because of one of the features that the Z50II has for manual focus. It has subject detection manual focus assist, much like the Nikon ZF and the Z6 which makes it a breeze to focus a lens, particularly a 23mm lens. And that lens will be perfect for street photography with that camera. Top it down to f11, you can have basically everything in the world in focus through it, and it's a beautiful lens. I'll show you some pictures from that lens too. So let's jump in. I'll show you some photos that I've captured over the years with the Z50. Then we'll talk about what's different between the new Z52 and the original Z50. All right, so here we go. I've got some images, most of which are with the Z50. A few maybe were shot with the Z9 to test some of the DX lenses. It has about the same crop factor. And if I jump in here, I'm in Lightroom. We'll have a look at this. Oop, I didn't mean to hit D, I meant to hit E. E is the loop view in Lightroom, D is developed. And you can see I've got exposure information up here. You can see that this was shot, you know, on the Z50 back in 2020, January, right after this camera launched in late 2019. And what lens I'm working with, the 16-50 right here, you know, exposure settings, everything, you can see it all right there. This was in Joshua Tree. This was the first real workshop trip that I took this lens with me on. And or this camera with me on, and I just loved it. You know, here's the pier in Manhattan Beach, shooting into backlight with that little kit, 16-50, the little kit lens that we're talking about. Shooting into backlight like this, pretty darn incredible. Almost no ghosting in flare, really, to speak of at all. The shadow details, the dynamic range, an amazing little sensor. This is the same sensor, I might add, that was in the Nikon D500 before the Z system launched. They repurposed that APS-C sensor to put into the Z50, and that's the sensor they've been using ever since. Here's pike and pepper. You can see they're tiny. You'll see pictures of them growing up through this camera and its lenses. Again, the 16-50 in Baja. Doing some wildlife with my 70-200 2.8S lens on that camera in Baja. You know, when you put a 70-200 2.8 in front of an APS-C crop sensor, it gives you the equivalence of 110 or 105 to 300 millimeter focal length reach for zooming in on a subject. Pepper and Stacy in Baja. Here, you know, perfect camera to take on a backcountry ski trip. We climbed and skied off the summit of Mount Baker up in northern Washington. And that's my good friend Paul skiing down by seracs and crevasses. Perfect little camera to have for that kind of situation. Again, with the 16-50 millimeter lens. You know, my wife shooting pictures of me playing in the surf in Florida with the kids at their grandparents' house in Palm Coast. You know, just, I mean, playing with the neighbor kids there. And the image quality, the dynamic range, the autofocus for people has been great, just like the original Z cameras. You know, just stuff out and about, messing around, you know, Stacy taking pictures of Pike and I. A trip that we took to Baja, I mentioned, where it's really the only camera I took. This is with that 50-250 millimeter lens, racked all the way out to a 375 millimeter equivalent, you know, almost a 400 view of the world, compressing all that distance with the kiters and the Sea of Cortez. In Costa Rica, we took this so the kids could photograph with. You know, out along the coast, I was working with workshop participants and had this lightweight setup with me in case of wildlife, and we ran into all these these sea lions. Here in Costa Rica, Stacy was running around with the kids and encountered these spider monkeys. And she took these shots with the 50-250 at high ISO and with a little noise reduction, pretty darned amazing. You know, these were run through DxO Pure Raw, I think. Spider monkey, this is oh my gosh, I'm having a brain lock. Someone can correct me in the video comments. So, squirrel monkey, there we go, squirrel monkey in Costa Rica. Another one that Stacy shot. I was running around with the Z9 and barely saw any squirrel monkeys on that particular trip. This is a little parrot in Australia that just happened to pop up near the bar that we were shooting, and I had the 50-250 with the little camera running around with the family. Actually, Pike had it in case there were koalas, and I wound up kind of grabbing it from him and shooting that parrot. Or reflections in the water on our Newport workshop with a boat. There was an orange boat. Or showcasing during our Portland workshop how to pan motion on a car. I was shooting with the little pancake Nikon 2.8 full frame lens. That's a small, lightweight, kind of retro-styled full frame lens. But I had it with me and I slapped it on there and just started showing how you can pan traffic at a slower shutter speed with the Z50. Just an incredible lens. And I will say really quickly, this was shot by my son Pike during the Mazatlan eclipse handheld. Kind of amazing, right? So, you know, this more showcases some of the crazy lenses that we have out there for Nikon DX. This is that Voigtlander 23mm 1.2. And, you know, I think I used the Z9 just because it has a wee bit more resolution just to test sharpness. No problem, by the way, with the sharpness. Here it is on the Z50. This was in manually focusing again. The only reason I didn't keep that lens was it was just a little bit difficult to manual focus through the viewfinder without the manual focus subject detection assist that we're about to get with the Z50. The minute I saw that was going to be in the Z52, I ordered this lens back. I have it coming this week. I'll have it when the camera arrives. It's a great little tiny, beautifully made, old-fashioned Nikon looking 23mm, which in this camera is much more like a 35mm focal length, but at f1.2 it just lets you in a tiny little room blow the background away in situations. But at the same time, you know, here's Pike at his grandparents' house in New York, and you know, he's playing around with all this fun stuff back in, what was this, 2023. But all you have to do is go from f1.2 to f5.6 and you get almost everything in focus at 23mm. It's a very versatile lens. If you put it to f11, you get everything from 1.5 feet in front of you to infinity. If you hyperfocal focus it, if you zone focus it. Amazing, amazing little lens. Likewise, the Viltrox 75 1.2. I got that lens. Viltrox asked me to test it. I shot this picture of Pike making paper airplanes here in the studio and took a look at it and said, wow, holy cow. Shot this with the Z50 1400 ISO f1.2 in an almost dark studio. And I thought, what's this going to do outside? You know, here's Pepper out in our garden. This lens is special. The 75mm Viltrox is incredible. I'm going to link all of these lenses in this video's full description. But, you know, out on our Oregon Coast workshop, I was so excited about this Viltrox, I brought it on the Z50 just to kind of play around with it. My little cousin Leon, shortly after he was born, my cousin Gabby's little son, who we are so fortunate gets to hang out with us. I mean, it's just a dream portrait lens. It's like having a 135 1.2. It's quite nuts. It does a beautiful job with bokeh. You know, it doesn't have the perfect circular balls that the Plena has, but everything else is, there's nothing to complain about. All right, so there you go. There's some images and some examples from lenses that I love for this camera. I'm putting links, by the way, to this camera and those lenses that I've discussed right up here. You can just click there, or you can always go to hudsonhenry.com/ATS-links. You know, again, as I said, I can't wait to get that 23mm 1.2 lens on the Z52 with its manual focus subject detection. We'll talk about that in just a second. Before we jump in and we look at the pros and cons and new features of the Z52 alongside features that we wish were in the Z52, I'll talk really briefly about who I think this camera is for and who I think it's not for. First and foremost, there was a point in time where many of us that were serious about our photography Nikon photographers, carried around the Nikon D850 and the D500 and felt like we kind of had the world by the table. With the D850, we had a 36 megapixel, or maybe was it 46 megapixel, amazing camera that was good at everything. And then with the D500, we had super fast frame rate and APS-C crop to get even more reach with that 1.5 crop factor, on our old f-mount lenses. So if you had, a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, it became something like a 105 to 300 millimeter lens's field of view when you're out trying to capture wildlife or sports. This Z52 is not that camera for the Z8 and Z9 crowd. If you just throw these big sensors into their crop mode, you're going to get about the same field of view, but you also get about the same amount of megapixels, which was somewhat true in the D850 age too. It's more the D810 age that had the lower megapixel count where you really lost resolution. You were down to 14 megapixels or something at the APS-C crop. What the Z50 is for, in my case, being able to slap this 50 to 250 millimeter lens on it, with a UV protector and hand it to 6-year-old Pike when we were in Costa Rica and say, go photograph monkeys. Or to take on a family trip where I don't want to carry a lot of weight, but still have the reach of the equivalent of 75 to 375 millimeters and that 24 to 75 millimeter reach just in this little package. This weighs almost nothing. I can fit it in my drone bag with my drone and have a drone in this on a family trip. Kind of amazing. For people that are on a budget and want to get a lot of bang for their buck, I'm constantly getting asked by people, should I buy the Z5, the cheaper full frame Nikon Z camera? And my answer is always, if the amount of money difference between the Z6 III and the Z5 really makes that big a difference to you, if that's in your budget, then the lenses to cover that full frame sensor for the full frame system are going to be so exorbitantly more expensive to get the kind of range that'll make you a flexible shooter. You'd be far better off buying a Z50 and now the Z52 with this 2-lens kit that gets you the equivalent of 24 to 375 millimeters image stabilized, great in backlight, high image quality, all for $1,300. I mean, you really just can't beat that. And then you get the benefit of these aftermarket lenses like the Viltrox 75 1.2, which is very, very similar to some full frame performance lenses from Nikon that cost thousands of dollars, and this costs hundreds of dollars. So it really is a value proposition, and it's a great gateway for people just wanting to kind of try something beyond a cell phone or point and shoot. For that young person who's taking their first high school or college class in photography and says, Mom, Dad, Grandpa, what could I have that would really expand my photographic abilities in this new thing that's getting me excited? This is a great option for that. And from the very beginning, it's had the same high quality electronic viewfinder as the Z camera of its generation. This has pretty much the same viewfinder as the original Z6 and Z7, same autofocus system, pretty much all the same capabilities. And particularly on the 50 series, you got all the same programmable buttons and capabilities. If you get good with this and you get excited about it, the step into the full frame world is an easy move. All right, with all that taken care of, let's take a quick talk about looking at the specs of the new Z52. What's exciting about it? What do I wish that it had that it doesn't? That we can maybe dream about something launching like a Z70 with in the not so distant future. All right, here we go. Something that would get the Z8, Z9 shooter, that backup camera, to be excited about. All right, so on the plus side, things that have changed. The biggest and most obvious is it gets that X-Speed 7 processor that the Z6 III, the ZF, the Z8, and the Z9 have. That really fast processing that lets the autofocus subject detection just get crazy. It's got all those subject detection modes that you have in the Z9, bird detect included. And I hear it even has some that'll probably be coming to other cameras that aren't there, like bicycle detection and stuff. So super, super cool. And also better low light focusing. So the original Z50 that I hold here focused down to -2 exposure value. The new one goes to -9 EV. We're talking amazing orders of magnitude better, being able to see in the dark, particularly if you choose to get some of the incredible wide aperture lenses that are available for it in autofocus. The 75 1.2 from Viltrox being one I'm thinking of, in low light conditions with that autofocus ability will be amazing. All right, it gets a bigger, more ergonomic body. The Z50, I always felt like I didn't have a place for my pinky. You get used to it. It's a small body. Some people just couldn't stand it, thought it felt toy-like. I've liked the fact that it's small and light and unobtrusive, particularly, you know, when you slap a smaller lens on it and go out street shooting, and nobody's gonna notice that this is anything. It just looks almost like a point and shoot, right? It's a very small, very unobtrusive little camera. That's a great thing. It also gets, instead of having, this has had a flip screen since the inception, and I've never liked its flip screen. Its flip screen comes out sort of, you know, old school style, but it also flipped under, which they thought somehow was a good idea for vloggers. But in reality, almost every way you would attach and hold the camera or put it on a tripod obstructs the screen in that selfie mode, so it never made a whole bunch of sense for vlogging. Now it flips out and rotates, ZF and Z6 III style. I think you're gonna see that, whether you like it or not, in all the Nikon cameras, and I think you can get used to it and learn to love it like I do. I prefer it. I vastly prefer it to the Z8, Z9 screen, which is I've never liked. I know a lot of people love it. It's never been my thing, but you know, differences of opinion make the world go around. I shoot a lot vertical on a tripod, and that screen able to tilt out, turn over, drop to look at from down below, flip, turn over, drop to look at from up above. I love that. Anyway, video shooters demand it. It's just very flexible. It lets you see from multiple angles and adjust and be where you want to be. It gets the 30 frame per second full resolution JPEG burst that the X-Speed 7 processors enable. Going to be electronic viewfinder only. So you can shoot at 30 frames a second, JPEG mode, electronic shutter, full res JPEGs, and it'll do 1 second of pre-release capture. Pre-release capture is pretty cool. It's an amazing tool in the kit for the action, sports, wildlife photographer, because you can half press the shutter button and it just starts recording 30 frames a second images on the card and recording over and recording over and recording over until you press it all the way, and then it backs up and records the second before you pressed it. And that lets you get that instant that the snake's tongue comes out of its mouth, or the ball hits the bat, or the crazy thing you've been waiting for happens, and you don't have to have, you know, ESP to capture it as it happens. You get a second before you push the button. Super handy. It gets manual focus subject detection. We talked about this. The minute that I saw that the Z50II APS-C camera gets the manual focus subject detection that the ZF and the Z6 III have, I ordered that Voigtlander 23mm 1.2. Why? Well, it's because when you're looking at the scene through either auto area autofocus or any of the wide area autofocus modes, you'll see eyes of your subject or your chosen subject in the subject detection mode pop up with a box around it. If you focus till that box becomes green, it's in focus, and it keeps tracking it through the scene. And if you program, like I like to do, the OK button in the middle of the D-pad, if you program that OK button to zoom to 100%, tapping that button will zoom in. Without you selecting the eye, it sees an eye, the highlighted eye, just fills the frame with that eye. All you see is the eye. You can perfectly focus it. It tracks the eye while you're focusing it, and then you hit the shutter button, it takes the photo, and you can compose and shoot, shoot, shoot while you're in perfect focus on your subject's eye. That makes a manual focus lens like cheating to use. You get perfect focus if you learn how to use that thing properly, and that's exciting. So manual focus subject detection assist, that's a big deal for those of us who like vintage lenses or these really high precision, beautiful, old school metal lenses like Voigtlander is making for the system. We get USB-C power delivery. That's huge. I almost never switch batteries anymore now that we have USB-C power delivery in all the new cameras. That came with the Z6 III, Z7 III originally, but now it's throughout the camera line, the Z8, Z9, ZF, Z6 III. I love it. The Leica because while you're in between shoots, maybe it's in your camera bag, I plug this this Anker 20,000 milliamp battery bank into the camera, and it's topping off between wildlife encounters, between sunrise and sunset shoot. I almost never need to take the battery out and put another one in. I keep my camera topped off all the time just by plugging it into the battery bank. And at night, I just plug the camera in next to my phone. It's charged in the morning. It's wonderful. I use way less batteries. Speaking of batteries, it has a bigger, longer lasting version, same form factor as the original Z APS-C cameras, the Z50, the ZFC, the Z30. I don't imagine that the older cameras are compatible with this new higher milliamp battery that's coming for the Z50II, but the Z50II is backwards compatible with those older batteries if you have a bunch of those. So that's nice. Good that they did that. Nikon has always been committed to backwards compatibility, and that continues in the Z world. It's got a headphone jack. That's an ad from the Z50. Video shooters are going to love that. One of the cool things about that headphone jack is they're also releasing a wired remote control cord for it that will plug into the headphone jack. Simple, old school press. You can press and lock. Simple remote control. That's something sorely missing for ZF users. If you're a ZF user watching this, the minute that I get my Z52 and the remote cord, which should be later this month, I will test it on the the ZF and report back if it works. I'm hoping it works in the ZF's headphone jack too, as a good, stable, wired remote control that's not Bluetooth connected. The Bluetooth connection kind of drives me nuts. For the video shooter out there, it does 4K 60 internal, and it does internal 10-bit log recording. That's a big upgrade. That's phenomenal for people like me that shoot video a lot. It also has a 125-minute timeout, so it's not those 29-minute clips like the original one, limited. You can shoot a long-form video like this with it. And it has a red light, a red indicator, a lamp on the front so that you know that it's actually recording. Like, so does the Z30 that I'm staring at with you guys in it right now. And that's a really nice deal for the vlogger out there who doesn't have someone actually running the camera. They can tell, you can see that it's recording. Even if someone is running the camera and they're not paying attention and something's gone wrong, you as the person looking into the camera can see that it's recording. I guess the other great thing is the price. They've kept the price under $1,000. It's $910 essentially for the body only. If you get it with just this little 16-50, 24-75 equivalent lens, it's $1,049. If you get it with both the 16-50 as well as the 50-250, which I would highly recommend if you don't have these lenses, it's $1,299. That's a screaming deal for a camera that gets you the equivalent of 24 to 375 millimeter if you were shooting full frame, all in a lightweight package like this. So those are the great things, all right? The thing that disappointed me when I read the press release, there's always things that disappoint you. And the big, obvious, glaring one is that they're still using that wonderful sensor from the D500. I'm sure they've juiced it and tweaked it and made it, I'll tell you one more cool thing afterwards, just hopefully I don't forget. Call me on it if I do. But it is disappointing that it's still that 20 megapixel sensor. Now think about it, the D5 was basically a 20 megapixel camera as well, you know, and the D500 that we loved so much as well, obviously same sensor, but it would have been great. It would have been really nice if maybe they'd gone somewhere in the range that Fuji's gone with the brand new X100 and given us, you know, in the 30 plus megapixels range. Maybe that will come. As I said, maybe there will be a Z70, which would harken back to the days of the wonderful D70 that many of us had at the dawn of Nikon's digital age. No in-body image stabilization. And I think that both of the reasons for these things are to keep that price down low. This is an entry-level camera. This is that camera for my kids to bang around with in the jungle. This is that camera to give to your high school student getting into photography. This is a camera that is affordable, and that's a wonderful thing. So we don't get image stabilization in the body, and we don't get higher megapixel count or a new exciting sensor. We do get all the crazy processing and autofocus power, which is huge. The other thing, as I said, this 50 to 250 millimeter lens and this 16 to 50 millimeter lens both have built-in image stabilization, and it's quite good. So you do get image stabilization with the kit lenses. The sad thing is you don't with the Viltrox 75 1.2. You got to be careful. You keep your shutter speed up high enough. You want to, 80th of a second, I would say, to be safe with this. Maybe 100th of a second, just to be extra special safe with it, since it's the crop factor. And again, that leaves room down the road. Maybe there is a new APS-C sensor working through the Skunk Works, and they'll see how this Z52 does. And potentially we get something really, really cool with 36 megapixels and in-body image stabilization. I would love that. That would be phenomenal. That would become an epic backup camera to the Z9 or the Z8. So, well, I did forget. I'm having to weave this in. The one other really cool thing that's new and different on the Z52, it's new for any Nikon camera, is a picture control dedicated button. It's just under the ISO button on the top of the camera, and it's going to let people like me that like to shoot in black and white in monochrome or in color pick which picture profile they want to work with. I love the switch on the ZF. I think that's the precursor to this, where you can flip the switch and you're in monochrome mode or color mode or video. With this camera, there's a picture control mode, and I know a lot of you are saying, well, I shoot RAW, so this won't make a speck of difference to me. But in actuality, like, if you like shooting in monochrome, you'll see the world in monochrome through your camera. And if you work with Lightroom Classic like I do, you can set Lightroom Classic to read the built-in profile in your RAW file. And Nikon is awesome in that they do embed that picture control profile in the RAW file. That enables Lightroom to bring it up and adjust it to look just like the camera intended. So you see what you saw in the viewfinder, you see what you saw in the back of the LCD. And that's wonderful for those who like to play around with black and white. So you can flip and be looking at the world in that picture control view that you like. You can customize those, you can build your own. You can work with Nikon's stock ones. I really like their stock monochrome. I think it looks wonderful. I like looking at the world through the electronic viewfinder and seeing it in pure tone in that monochrome mode. And then I love the fact that the RAW files come in looking just like that in Lightroom. So that button is super powerful, and I think it's something that Fuji shooters have been using a lot more in the JPEG realm. But the fact that Nikon embeds those profiles in their RAW files lets you play around with that kind of color creative process in the field, in your capture, in your edit, right on through. It's just a cool tool, and it's something to play around with, particularly the black and white to color. I think that the Z50 is a really exciting, cool, fun tool. I can't wait to use it. I can't wait to put it into my kids' hands and see what they do with it. I think it could be a really, really wonderful camera for a whole lot of people. And as soon as I get it in my hands, I'll give you some hands-on, some image samples, and we'll do a full setup guide for it for people that are getting one. So stay tuned for that stuff. Again, as I said, office hours are next week, the 19th, so sign up for those, leave us a question. We'll talk about a lot of Nikon gear, as we usually do in open Q&As, but also any gear or any photographic question or traveling question or you name it. It's just a wide open Q&A about anything with creative imaging, even video. Hit me with the questions. We'll have a ton of fun. Rick and Darren and I don't think David can make it, but it's going to be a fun one. So we will see you there. I hope everybody is staying safe, staying creative. We'll see you next week.